be.
Good morning. I'm going to call the facilities meeting to order. It's July 23rd, 9 o'clock. We'll start off with the airport agenda, so we're going to need a motion to approve the minutes of the prior meeting. Do I have a motion for that? Mr. Loeb, second. Mr. Garrity, all in favor to approve? Aye. Against? None. Okay. We're going to go airport first. The action agenda, new business, number 3, and I will turn it over immediately to Mr. DeGraw.
Good morning, everybody. Request number 1 is authorizing the closure and return of funds for capital projects H359 and H379.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Garrity, second by Mr. Simpson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Request number 2 is authorizing the approval of the airport's DVE program and policy statement.
Do I have a motion for that? Motion by Mr. Loeb, second by Mr. McDevitt. All in favor?
Question?
Question.
Could you explain what DV, I know what the words are, but what actually companies around here qualify for this, and what participation do we have in it historically?
So in order to receive federal grants, we need to have a DVE program that conforms with the FAA requirements.
Right.
And that's what this is here. We set up a 3-year goal. Normally it's around 2 to 3%, but it varies. That's our overall goal. Each project will have a specific goal. And I'm not sure exactly what companies around here qualify, but they have to be part of a certified DVE program in order to be able to qualify.
Do we have any history of participation, or the answer you're not sure?
We require participation in each grant that we put out in the RFP. We require them to show a certain level of participation, or at a minimum a good faith effort, and they have to document that. So we've been meeting our DVE goals over the course of the years, more or less.
Right.
Most of the consulting engineering firms that we use some consultants that are DVE participants. They're required to. Even with the DOT type of grants, it's the same thing. We have to have, most of the primary consultants we use, they'll have subs that are all DVE certified.
Right. Thank you.
Same with the contractors. They know the DVE firms, and they use those firms specifically for subs to bring their DVE up. And sometimes we'll end up with a 100% DVE firm as a primary contractor. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraw. Thanks, Mr. Lowe, for the question. We have a motion on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Number 4, pending and referral items, none. Information for discussion and review. I'm going to turn this one over now to Kevin.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. As of the last meeting, we had McFarland Johnson here to discuss the marketing plan for the airport. One of the concepts that they came up with was the solar energy for the airport. Don had handed out a page to each one of you that shows the areas around the airport that could be potential locations for a solar farm. Don and I would like to move forward to getting an RFP prepared to put out to bid for that purpose, and we're just looking for buy-in from the committee.
Discussion. Mr. Wild?
Thank you. Kevin, thanks. Do you have any sense about how much power is going to be generated, and where's it going to go? And another question after that.
I don't as of yet, no. This is just the initial start of this.
So this land, is it viable for any other industrial use? Or is this land just the only thing we can really do with it is solar?
I think based on the marketing grant that they had given us, or I'm sorry, the marketing proposal that they had given us, most of this land that is shown on this last sheet was strictly for solar. I don't think, and Don, you correct me if I'm wrong, that most of that land could be used for anything else. I think they would be difficult building sites, but its better served purpose would be for the solar farms. Yeah, if you look at the top left corner, that area has the most potential for industrial use, coming onto Hicks Road there.
Okay.
But the nice thing about solar is it's a quiet neighbor. You know, there's no trucks in and out. It's not going to bother the neighbors nearby. Steady revenue flow.
Okay.
Minimal disruption to the land. So that's why we picked these areas out.
If I may follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Just another question. You know, solar, I don't know a ton about solar. I know somewhat of it. but I'm curious if there's any restrictions because it's next to the airport. Because of accidents, I've always heard that firefighters are always worried about solar on the roofs, and how do they deal with the potential of getting zapped by the solar? So I'm just curious how that plays in with the federal guidelines around the airports.
Well, we would ensure that all the solar farms are outside of the approaches to the best that we can in the restricted areas and the protected zones. So the FAA would review that and give us a thumbs up on it, that they were far enough away to present a minimal hazard. There's always that chance next to the airport. We'd also have to look for a land use release for this, because right now everything on the airport's for aeronautical purposes only, and we'd have to go to a non-aeronautical use. So we'd have to get some buy-in from the FAA. And also we have to do a reflectivity study, because we don't want the pilots coming in getting blinded by the light. So we'd have to make sure that the areas and the direction that these panels are set up are going to provide a safe approach for the pilots. So we have a few steps that we have to do, but before we do all those steps, which are going to take a while, we want to get your general consensus of buy-in on it.
Other discussion. Mr. Loeb?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's the focus of the market for this electricity? It's quite a ways away. Is it going to be the industrial park?
So we actually had a company stop by and talk to me, and they were interested in this area because there's a substation down on Queensbury Avenue, and that they were going to connect it into the substation.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
A question in terms of, the balloon festival, other events like that, how do we put up fencing to protect the property?
Yeah, we'd have to consider each parcel and how to protect it. Everything in here except for that little green area on the right-hand side is all inside the perimeter fence now.
Mm-hmm.
If we thought that these areas required additional fencing, we would have to, that would all fall on the developer to do that. And this one down at the bottom, the 56-acre area, that's where the RVs go. So they wouldn't be parking there anymore if that were to go.
So the parking for the RVs would go?
What
would be our, and I know we're getting way ahead of, all we're doing now is to go forward, but thinking down the road, we're probably going to need to have some type of alternate plan for the RVs. Any other discussion on this? Personally, I think it's a good idea. I'd love to see some solar out at the airport on some land that's really rough and not usable for much other else than and well, let me ask you this, Don. What type of revenue would the county receive for, let's say you max out your solar potential here, okay? What type of revenue are we looking at for the county?
Well, the short answer is I don't know, and I hate to give you guys a real number because I'm kind of new to this. I did ask that same question to the people who came a few months ago, and the number they gave me was fairly substantial. It wouldn't totally solve our revenue problem, but it would certainly take up 30-35% of our shortfall. But until you get the numbers from them in an RFP, I really couldn't say exactly.
Right.
But it wasn't insignificant. It caught my attention.
Okay. That's just another step in trying to reduce the costs out at the airport, which I think you guys have been doing a great job, as well as the committee reducing the liability to the county taxpayers and increasing revenue sources where we can and decreasing costs. So, Ms. Bramer.
I think this is a great idea and nice way to use that space without having conflicts with our residential neighbors. I am curious though, they must have given you some sort of value per acre. Can you share with us what that was?
They did, and I have a number in my head, but I hate to say it publicly because I'm just not sure how accurate it is. He kind of gave it to me in confidence.
I think that's a pretty standard number they give out there. I'm working on another solar project out there.
This is the only person I've ever dealt with, so I don't know if there is a standard number out there. But if there is, he did say that they were looking for at least 100 acres. So if there's a standard number out there and you attach it to 100 acres, that would be an approximate number.
Ms. Bramer, do you know what a standard number would be?
I don't want to say either.
Okay.
Well, I don't feel so
For
bad.
fear of, for fear of saying the wrong number. But I know this is actually pretty small now. They're looking for things that are larger than 250 acres. The larger solar companies.
Yep.
So if we can get them in here, I think we should
Well,
pursue it.
Yeah, personally, I believe it's a great additional revenue source if we could actually convince someone to do it. So, are there any other questions from the committee? Yes, Mr.
To
McDiff.
maybe change geography just a little bit. Today's Post-Star had a bravo for the city of Glens Falls and Queensbury as it relates to the solar prerogative you guys are investigating, the EPA, whatever. So again, land that is questionable in terms of economic value, but utilizing it to hopefully an environmentally friendly end.
Any other questions? Mr. Wild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess as we go through this proposal, I'd like to see if we could include, instead of selling the power and putting it to the grid, using it for ourselves and our own uses, or actually finding some way to store it so that if in case of emergencies, we don't have to rely on necessarily generator backup power, but we have some battery storage to be able to support some other critical infrastructure. So just a thought. I'd like to see if we can consider that and think forward about other critical infrastructure that we'd like to maintain and go from there.
Okay, thank you. So what do you need, Don, to move forward? Would you like just a hand show vote of who wants?
Consensus that this is something that the county's interested in and move forward with the preliminary assessments.
Okay, so I'm going to do a roll call vote, if that's okay, on whether you want to go forward with the preliminary authorization of making part of this land out at the airport solar ready. So I'm going to go roll call vote. So Amanda, will you do the roll call vote, please?
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Garrity?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Simpson?
Yes.
Ms. Frazier?
Yes.
Mr. Wild?
Yes.
Mr. McDevitt?
Yes.
Mr. Sokol?
Yes.
Mr. Diamond?
Yes.
Mr. Bramer?
Yes.
Yes. So that's unanimous. I'm pleased to see that we're all on board with that. Kevin, would you like to
I
make a
just want
comment?
to add that this RFP process will not go quick. It'll take some time to put this together. Probably the next couple of months we'll have something put together for it.
If I may ask along the same lines, Kevin, who's going to help you with the RFP? You can use a consultant to do this, or you're going to use a company that came to you to help with the
I'm not going to
RFP?
use the company that came to me because we can't. It's going to go out for an RFP to everybody, so it would be unfair to everybody else to have that company help me. Most likely we'll do it in-house.
Okay.
I have enough staff, and with Don, I think we can do it in-house.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bramer?
Hey, Mr. Hajo, since you're already working on this, could you roll in some of the county-owned old landfill sites?
I can, is that, and I'm not sure, and it's not my decision to make whether or not we're going to use those for solar or for something different. But I will look at the landfill sites. The only one that I know of myself right now is up on Jenkinsville Road.
That's the one I was referring to.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe it's not even close enough to a substation kind of thing to be worthwhile, but if we're doing it and it's not, we could expand that thought process beyond the airport. I don't know, maybe, if you're talking if just Dawn is doing it, I don't know, maybe it doesn't make sense.
How many acres are we talking about there?
I don't recall what Jenkinsville is.
Do you know, Claudia?
I don't know, I'd have to ask Lexi.
Okay, so you've got the approval to go forward with the next step in the process. I know it's going to be a long process, but personally, I'm real pleased that everybody's on board with this, and we can move forward. Again, one final comment, that additional revenue can only help us as a county in decreasing the costs out there, so that's a great move. Okay, update, Don, on the hangars 18 mid-year report revenue?
So in January, we took over 18 hangars from the FBO, and we started managing them independently. That will produce for us about $65,000 in revenue by the end of the year. Happy to report that we've received $45,000 already, and all the tenants are up to date on their payments, except for one tenant, which I'm working with Mary on, who owes us $525 to date. But that's going very well. We've had little to no maintenance costs on those hangars, and so it's all been pure revenue.
Questions? Okay, thank you, Don. Very good. All good stuff. Money coming in, new stuff working. Love it. Privilege of the floor. Anyone on the floor want to bring up any topic concerning the airport? Seeing none, okay, we'll move forward. We will now conclude the airport portion of the meeting, and we will go to the buildings and grounds portion. So if you'd take out that agenda, please. And we'll go right to number 3, which is action agenda, new business. And who do I ask? Okay,
I don't
Kevin?
know why my name's not on there. On page 2 is a request, notice of intent to fill for the position of a cleaner. Just had a cleaner, I don't know why it says resignation. He actually is retiring.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Garrity, second by Mr. Simpson. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Next item is under referral and pending items, and I'm going to look for Amanda at this. We approved at the board meeting both bays at Kivagagi to be used for D&G at $7,000 a month, so I believe we can take this referral off.
You can take number 1 off, which is referral on your agenda. We've already approved the 2-bay, $7,000. You can go.
Chairman?
Yes.
Do we have a copy of the lease to review?
Oh, I didn't do it yet.
Mary, not yet.
Okay. I would like a copy
Mhm.
when you send it out to Mike.
If it's not too big, could you send it out to the full committee?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you.
The next item under referral and pending items was the consensus of majority of the committee to consider construction of a new OES in the grass area between buildings and grounds facility and public health nurses parking area, identified as location number 2 on the handout that I have provided. I think since then, and it went out to an email, that we feel the better option is to put it behind Frank's building, which is the building and grounds building out here in the back parking lot. There's very little impact to that parking lot area out there. Most of those spaces aren't used out there. Maybe on busier days when they have court, some of them get used, but it doesn't fill up out there. So I believe, and I don't know if we have to choose it here as being the first site, that the email kind of covered that.
It wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to recap, we decided on Site 2. Kevin and Frank went out there and said from a logistical standpoint, we were going to have to cut some lines and do all that, and the cost was going to be...
Yeah, I can touch on that a little
Okay,
bit.
thanks.
The grassy area out back here, and I pointed out last time we were here, is between basically Frank's parking lot over here and the nurse's parking lot. The 600-volt transmission line that feeds the county center comes up Glen Lake Road and comes right through that grassy area. There also is the geothermal field on the other side. Most of the lines that come from that geothermal field also come through that same lot, as well as a water line. So for us to move the utilities in there, it was going to be anywhere from a $50,000 to $100,000 cost. I didn't think that would be worthwhile to move that, put the building there when we have another spot. If we're going to keep it on the county center right behind Frank's building, that it makes more sense.
Okay, so where we are is, we said Site 2, then this committee said, well, maybe we go to Site 1 after further review from Kevin and Frank. I think we still need to make sure that if that's committee's flavor, to go to Site number 1. And then there'll be 3 sizes of buildings. I think Kevin's going to discuss that momentarily. And he's got some just ballpark figures. We haven't put out an RFP or anything. We haven't gotten to that stage. So I'll let him discuss that. But I'm going to throw this question out to the committee. What's your opinion on going to Site number 1 now? Again, Site 2 had to be kind of scrubbed. Is that the, yes, Mr. Loeb.
One sounds fine with me.
One sounds fine with you, Ms. Bramer.
When I was over there for the centralized arraignment court tour or ribbon cutting, there were not very many vehicles over there in that parking lot, so I think it will be a minimal impact. So I support moving it over there.
Okay.
Site one.
Other discussion? Yes, Mr. Stroh.
Now, Kevin, this is speaking to location number 2.
Correct.
That's the previous conversation.
That's correct.
Now we're looking at, okay, so I support that.
Yep. Okay, you support that. So I guess all I just need is a show of hands, just if we have support on that. If not, we can have further discussion. So is there support to go to site number 1 by a show of hands? Opposed? 2. Okay, thank you. So that's the committee's flavor to move forward to site number 1. Now, Kevin, you want to explain the different options and...
I will, and that goes to the information for discussion and review. I haven't put out anything formally for an RFP process yet. I said at last meeting I would sit down with Brian LaFleur and go over some of his building options and what he was looking for, what he needed for his facility. As you recall, in the spreadsheet that I handed out, and I apologize for not bringing it today, there were 4 different types of buildings. One was like a 30 by 160. Brian said that wasn't deep enough. You probably need like a 40 or maybe even deeper. Then there was, I think, a 75 by 65, 75 maybe by 82. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. And then an 80 by 90. So I had asked Frank with his guys just kind of lay out the buildings in that area number 1, or site number 1 behind his building. All the building sites fit except for the one that I had pegged as, say, a 30 by 160. That would make it would be a long facility. It would be a little bit tight coming up towards the entrance road where you come into that parking lot. So the other 3 buildings, basically they're square buildings. They do fit on the site. So I looked at cost, just ballpark number cost, and that's the same thing that I provided in a spreadsheet before. I had also reached out to Roselle Industries because they do pre-engineered metal buildings, Butler buildings. And Brian reached out to, sorry, I have the name here. Brian, do you recall the name of the company? And they provided, so for Brian, they provided a building. This was an 80 by 90 building. I'll start off by saying I think the 80 by 90 building would work because it would benefit both Brian as well as DPW. A lot of Frank's equipment down here, in the winter months, all his mowers goes across the street into Gurney Lane in the brick building over there. Most of you have driven by that brick building. It's not in the best of shape. In fact, it leaks. The rubber membrane roof actually came off this past spring in a windstorm. The building eventually needs to be torn down. We probably have ponding of water in there.
It's actually going to fall down.
It's actually, yeah, it's actually probably fall down. So
It's going to fall down.
So we've taken most of our equipment out of that building. Again, he does store the mowers in there in the winter months. But I think that if we build this 80 by 90 building for Brian, we could have the center bay basically to store all of our equipment. One of the other pieces of equipment that typically stays out is the front end loader that we use around the county center during snow and ice seasons. What we have to do in the winter months is pull it into his bays, which takes all his trucks out of that bay and puts them outside as well. So it would benefit both DPW and OES. So the 80 by 90 building that Brian had received a price on was delivered building complete with all doors, overhead doors as well as man doors, insulated. I think it was 80 by 90, 16-foot ceilings, 3-on-12 roof pitch. Basically, the building was complete. Doesn't include foundations or anything like that. And they said they would deliver the building anywhere from $96,000 to $99,000. Again, it has to go out to bid. Now, when I reached out to Roselle, I had asked Roselle to give me kind of a ballpark figure. I kind of put him on the spot. They didn't have their building guy in. He's been out of state doing something somewhere else. So they didn't, he just threw kind of ballpark numbers to me. He said there was probably a 20% contingency on the numbers. He said building complete, start to finish building complete, $450,000. That's not us doing anything. It's not us doing any foundation work, not us doing any electrical work. And the whole building's complete for $450,000. His building cost alone was about $145 compared to Brian's, which was 99. Now again, he's throwing a contingency upon that building because he doesn't, no different than Don not wanting to give the number for the solar. He's just a ballpark number. That's all it is.
Mr. Straugh?
Just a thought. Have we ever considered using that for the OES building site? If we're going to take that old brick building down, put the new building up over there.
That was one of the sites that I did look for, and that was in that spreadsheet that I handed out to you.
Yeah.
The problem with that site is it only fits one size building on there. It fits, I think, the smaller size building that we had posted, which was the 75 by 65, which I don't even think that covers all of, actually Brian has a copy so I can look at it.
It's not big enough?
I don't think it covers, it can fit all of Brian's equipment inside that building. And then, of course, we would have to buy right away from behind that building, and I would have to buy it from Supervisor Stroud, because he owns the property.
Yeah, but that'd be a good place maybe to locate, but the lot is kind of small.
The lot is small. There is still electrical there. I don't, is it a big enough service? Is it 60 amp service in there? Or is it large?
I'm not sure, but there are some environmental concerns
There
there
are.
too. There's a brook that runs very close to the back of that building.
Yeah.
There was at one time a boiler in that building, way before our time, but who knows what's in the ground I just think
But it's a small site.
it's very small, and the salt shed is there too for the.
Well, I thought it was worth asking.
I know we've run into trouble before with the brook.
Yeah.
So let me get this straight. So, the building over there is falling down. You're giving us information that we have 3 options. We've decided Site 1 would be the place to put it. We have 3 different options on the size of the building. Your recommendation, or you're talking about the 80 by 90, which would house all the OES equipment for Mr. LaFleur. It would keep one bay open to put things from DPW, which currently is in a building that's falling down. So the cost to me scares me a little bit, $450, but on the upside, that precludes any work from your team at all, which last time you told us, if you guys did it, you could probably cut the cost in half. It would take approximately 2 years, where this would take approximately, again, this is real ballpark, so approximately 6 months. So am I correct so far?
Yep.
Okay. So I guess this committee's got to decide what size building, okay? The fact that the number's fairly high, at least to me, 450, but we're getting a two for one. We're going to, because we've got to do something for the DPW equipment, so obviously that building will be non-existent fairly soon. So let's have some, yes, before we do, Kevin?
I just wanted to touch on, again, it would take me 2 years because I would have to devote staff to it, and I could only devote staff when they weren't doing other work. Frank's guys are continuously busy. My road guys are continuously busy. I can't pull them off a road to build a facility. And the fact of the matter is, again, Roselle, they threw a contingency on that number. They're experts at this. My guys are not. It's a learning curve for us to put something like this together. Yeah, it's a puzzle. I built my house in Clifton Park, and it was a pre-engineered, basically, house. I put the walls up myself, but it was a puzzle, and it took me a lot of time to do it, as opposed to somebody else who was an expert at it, and they can do it much quicker than I could. So, a contractor doing this, probably within 6 months they'll be done.
And you did mention that basically most, if not all, of the projects in the county would be stopped for 2 years. So that's got to be put in the equation. Now, Mr. Wild, I believe you had your hand up
Mr.
first?
Chairman, thank you. I have to suggest that we take a different look at this again. $450,000 coming out of our reserve fund is an awful lot of money. And I still haven't seen the comparison of the South End property we have, the Shibagagi property, and what the revenue that we're going to get from that by leasing it versus using that property for this application, what's the difference in cost and price to be able to make this happen? I don't understand that. I'd like to take a big picture view of this and say, where are we going? $450,000, it's $500,000 out of our reserve to build a new building over here where we have a building and property down in the south end that could serve potentially this purpose. And I'd like to see that before we move forward with any kind of decision.
Brian?
How many, if we were to go with just having a building delivered, you're going to do all the foundation work and put it together, how many full-time equivalents does that take? How many would be working on that site every day?
3 or 4 at the most. Where a contractor's probably going to have, a crew of 10 to 12. Yeah, I mean, it's just part of building is building, and if I was to do it in-house, we don't have cranes to put up this building. We would need to still hire that out, which is, again, Roselle is on contract with us for crane service, so, and I believe I put in here, that could anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 alone for the crane.
Ms. Bramer?
Are you saying, Kevin, that it would not be feasible for us to do the foundation and then have something delivered? Like, if we were to put out an RFP, would we ask for quotes just to do the building? Or do we need to have the whole thing done by outside?
We don't need to have it all done by the outside, but I'm just saying, if I was to do it in-house, it's...
I want you to try, though, to tell me about the difference between just doing the foundation in-house and letting someone else do the building. I think doing us in-house, it sounds not workable for the whole thing, but just, what about just the foundation?
The foundation can be done in-house, but again, I don't have the capacity of individuals in buildings and grounds to do that work.
Okay.
Okay. They would literally have to stop doing the rest of the work within the county. I mean, if someone complained for a heat issue or something during the winter months, I've got to pull them off there to come over here and do work at the county center.
I also...
Frank, go ahead.
I have a major concern because we're going into phase 3 of our court project, which I think it's going to fall all on buildings and grounds. So that's going to keep us pretty busy.
Okay, here's the lineup. I'm going to let Mr. Driscoll, then Mr. Simpson, then Mr. Strauss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the discussion about whether or not we're looking to build on campus or off campus, I'm not familiar with OES's staff's opinion on their ability to do their jobs and what the benefits or detriments of being on campus versus off campus are. And I think that should be part of the conversation if we're still discussing whether or not, to build on Gurney Lane or maybe on campus.
I think, and I don't want to speak for Mr. LaFleur, but I believe your preference is to be on campus. Am I correct with that assumption?
Correct, sir.
Okay. So that's been his position all along. Now, Mr. Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not in favor of using our staff for it. Our DPW staff, there's a lot of road work, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, and we may think that we're saving money by taking them off road work, but in the long run, I don't think we are. I think we're better off if we're going to build something that we do an RFP for the erection of the building and do that with professional, for people that are mobilized to do that. Just from my experience.
Mr. Strout?
Along with that, the other thing is if things go awry, the finger pointing, and, if the utilities aren't in the right place, in the foundation or what have you, or the foundation's off, if you have one company do it, there's only one place to point that finger. So if you complicate matters by us trying to save a couple of bucks, might not save me a couple of bucks in the long run.
Okay, good point. Mr. McDevitt?
I think, the long-term interests of the county, I believe, in my opinion, are better served by centralizing as much as possible. You know, here we have a pretty remarkable location in that we have all of the services necessary for county delivery of goods and services under one roof, off exit 20. Just seems long-term that that's a smart move, okay? We're not moving to the south. We're not getting involved with potential contamination issues. We're just fundamentally saying, long-term, this is a simpler, better long-term decision to put it all under one roof off exit 20. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other, Mr. Diamond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for Kevin. During this 2-year period, if in fact county was supposed to build was going to build a building, where would the equipment be stored at that point in time? Outside?
I would have to defer to Mr. LaFleur, but I'm assuming it would be put outside.
Okay. And prior to the movement to the Sibagagi site, the equipment was stored outside.
That's correct.
Is there any reason why we can't store the equipment outside?
I will defer again to
Okay.
Mr. LaFleur.
So that leads me to my next point, is that we have a building that the county retrofitted down to Sibagagi for the cost of between $80,000 and $100,000 to move Mr. LaFleur there. When I was chairman, we had a lot of challenges in front of us, and one of it was to convince him to move there. It was brought to our attention that we have a housekeeping problem down there, so we've decided to move him out of that facility. Number one, if the housekeeping problem was resolved, other than the inconvenience of shifting equipment to Mr. LaFleur's department, it was a perfectly capable building. He's not a first respondee. Our police and fire are. He has to, you know, there's times if he has to be called out, he can mobilize his workforce when he determines what is needed. But the problem we have at the building that we haven't resolved yet is housekeeping issue. Our building was perfectly capable of accommodating his needs. So my thought, along with what Mr. Wild suggested, was maybe we ought to reconsider that building and not spend at least $450,000. Or better yet, hold them accountable to their housekeeping issues and just suggest to Mr. LaFleur, we've spent enough money here, you will be assigned to this building and you will make it work. He brought up it's backing into a cave. Well, I don't know what that means. I've never backed into a cave. But Mr. Wild suggested maybe we can fit up your equipment with some to be able to view our backing up. That was an answer to that question. Was it didn't make a lot of sense, or I'm not going to be here for this going forward. But I personally have to say I will not support $450,000 coming out of the fund balance after we've spent $100,000 to fit the building up. We're going to spend another $80,000 to $100,000 to put a new roof on it, and then we're going to build $450,000. I'd have to vote publicly against that.
Chairman Conover?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin, just so I'm clear, so they're going to deliver the building that we want for about $10 a square foot, plus or minus. And the contractor can get it at $10 a square foot. The building is the building is the building, right? So the at $62.50 a square foot, which is what we're saying we can. Somebody's saying they can build us at. I assume that's at prevailing wage rate.
It is.
Then the difference really in labor is the difference between our unit price and his unit price at prevailing wage, which might be significant, but if it takes us twice as long, or 3 times as long, there is no savings. In other words, we're paying somebody $18 an hour, and he has to pay prevailing wage at 36, but it takes us 3 times longer. We haven't saved anything. It's just not showing in the number. You know what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
We're putting a 0 on that, but it's not really a 0 because we're paying those people to construct the building. So I guess my concern at this point, and I'm just going to have confidence in our engineering staff that we feel that we can put a contract under law 7,200 square feet at $62.50 a square foot, and that's foundation, pad, brick, building, drive-in. So
I'd like to now have Mr. Thomas, Budget Officer.
Last meeting, I did say take the money from fund balance and build the building, but the building was, I was thinking $200,000, considerably less than $450,000. But we do have what will be $84,000 a year in lease payments. So why don't we bond them for $100 or $450? We got plenty of money there to pay the bond payment. So now we got income from the building down below. We got a new building here. Building down below is paying for the new building.
Mr. Hajos?
I was just going to say, again, that number, and I know it keeps getting thrown around the room, the $450,000 was just a ballpark number from one company. I think if we put it out and it's a little more competitive, you'll probably get better bids. Again, when I did reach out to them, they did tell me that there was probably minimum of 20% contingency on that because they were just unsure. So I know it's out there at $450,000, but it may be less.
Mr. Weil?
Mr. Chairman, thanks again. Two things. Kevin, I'd like to see a layout of what you're going to put in the building, right, so that we see that there's some opportunity for growth in the future if we're going to go this way. And secondly, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask you, as a prior vice president of a business, to make a financial decision like this without some type of financial analysis we're not doing our jobs. From my business experience, I can't do that. So I'd like to understand the different options that we have, including the South End property, and the revenue that we get, minus the maintenance costs that we have to put into that, versus this. I'd like to see a 5-year, a 10-year financial analysis to understand if we're making the right decision. Now, the budget officer mentioned floating a bond. We could put that in one of the financial analysis that we go through. But I really think that we need to have that analysis to make a prudent decision going forward. And if not, then we're not doing our jobs, and we're not being responsible for the county's money and our constituents' money. That's all I have to say. I hope we can honor that request.
Mr. Moore?
I think it's fairly simple. There's two options with the D&G building. We either sell it and put the money in a reserve and use that to pay cash on building a new building. We tried to do that last year and the board didn't want to sell it. Or we now have $7,000 a month in revenue from a lease. If that were to continue that rate on a year-round basis, $7,000 times 12, $84,000 a year. Out of that has to come $150 roughly to do the roof if it's a long-term lease. So let's say 10 years, $840,000 minus $150,000 is $600,000 thereabouts, which would go to pay for a new building.
Mr. Diamond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But I think the point you got to make is that we got a 6-month lease. He's not obligated to stay beyond 6 months. So if you're going to do your financial analysis and based on income, I think you got to extend it out to the life of your lease, which is 6 months. There's no guarantee he's going to stay after 6 months.
I want to make a motion that we put an RFP out for the full construction cost of that building.
I'll second it.
The 80, the dimension, 80 by 90.
Kevin, what was his initial response in the RFP? What was the time period that he was willing to go?
Who, Gary?
Yes, Gary Finger.
I think Gary wanted to go longer.
Yeah, he wants a long-term.
5 years.
He does.
He proposed 5 years.
For the committee.
He proposed 5 years. We gave him 6 months.
Right.
Well, this could be so that this committee could figure out where we wanted to go long-term.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. The motion again is what, Mr. Simpson?
To develop an RFP and exercise that, put it out for an 80 by 90 building complete.
And we have a second by Mr. Garrity. Now discussion.
On this site.
On this site, Site 1, Mr. Loeb.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the primary purpose, our concern should be with regard to OES, the service. Which Brian says to give optimal service to the citizens of this county is to have that site on campus. So, and we've already decided on this committee that we want site number 1. Cost, $450,000 as a possible cost, maybe a possible maximum cost. That's a lot of money. But on the other hand, we have it, and we have it to spare. If our budget officer thinks they're based on the cost of money, it would be financially prudent to bond it versus paying cash. That's just a financial calculation, easy to do. But at the very least, we could peel that money off right now, and we wouldn't see a dent. And then we would optimize our service to our citizens. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. LaFleur, did you want to say something? Did I see your hand or no?
Yes.
Yes, please.
If I can, I'd like to address a couple things that have been said here. I appreciate Mr. Hajos. He and I and Mr. Morehouse have met and gone through this, and I find it's an excellent plan. Here's my concern, and I've expressed this before, perhaps not to everyone that's at this table now. You cannot say that we are not a response agency, because we are. How many supervisors here are from Glens Falls? Okay. Is Finch Paper a major taxpayer in Glens Falls? Yeah?
Yeah.
A hospital? They don't pay taxes, but they're there.
Yeah, they're
Please address the chair.
Major employer.
Mr. LaFleur, just
Okay?
address the chair,
Here's the
please.
problem. The equipment that we're storing, which includes the major hazmat equipment that is used for the entire county, but probably 95% of it will be used in the city of Glens Falls. For me to put that equipment somewhere that's difficult to get to, and where I have nobody there to go get it, makes no sense to me. You cannot put a piece of response equipment. If you're going to tell Finch Paper, who have given up their hazmat team and donated their equipment to the city of Glens Falls Fire Department, and tell them that, well, we'll come to your hazmat incident, but it's going to take us 45 minutes, 50 minutes to get there. The same thing with our MCI trailer. We use this unit whenever we have an MCI. That's a mass casualty incident, anything over 6 bodies. Now, if we have an incident on the Northway, which we have responded to, I'm going to go down and fight to get it out of that other building. The last time we moved equipment out of that building, I had 2 of my jacks damaged because you cannot get out of the building without going through a gully. There's so many things that are difficult down there. A backup camera does not help you back up a trailer. There's only room to open the doors on one side of each trailer when we're in there. So, I understand the cost. I was one of the clerks on the jail job. That's a $24 million project. I know a little bit about construction. I've done construction my whole life. I understand the number that Kevin has. I think you're way out of ballpark with $450,000. I think you're much closer to $250,000. That's my opinion. I'm not an expert according to a lot of people. So I would like to see us find out what it's going to cost. I've already gone through with 2 companies to find out what it would cost if you want to have a pre-manufactured building here. I think we could get a price for what it's going to take to do it. As scary as it is, location number 1 that you just voted for is where I wanted to put that building 5 years ago. I developed plans 5 years ago to put it there. And we have been haggling about it for 5 years. We now have an opportunity to help out Mr. Morehouse. There's plenty of room in this building for my stuff and for the things he needs to cover up. I would like, at this point, to see us at least take it a little further, stop throwing around a $500,000 number, and deal with a real number. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have the motion on the floor.
One more.
One more question, Mr. Wild, go ahead.
And I have to, with all due respect for our administrator, Mr. Moore, the revenue that we get from that facility down in the South End, it's not $6,500. it should be considered that we already receive revenue from that recycling, and by moving the OES equipment out, we're getting $1,500 a month. That's a big difference. That's only what we should consider in our financial analysis, is the increment, not the full lease.
4,000 a month is
4,000
status
additional?
quo. Yeah, no, and now we're going to 7, so it's additional 3,000 a month.
So $3,000 a month we're gonna make to build a $300,000-$400,000 building. Okay? That's my only point about the financial analysis.
Thank you. Mr. Garrity?
Please vote.
There is a motion on the floor, there is a second, so would you repeat the motion for us, Amanda? Okay, would you repeat what the motion is?
Yes, I'm sorry, it's to put out an RFP for construction of the OS Office of Emergency Services Buildings and Grounds building at site number 1, which is right here behind the Buildings and Grounds.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
one more question, please, Mr. Chairman.
Final question, and then we're voting.
We're not making any commitment, we're just putting the RFP out.
That's correct. There's no final commitment here. So by a show of hands, please, all in favor of the motion? Opposed? Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
That was like pulling teeth. That's good, though. That's what's called democracy. Yes, Ms.
Before we
Bramer?
move away from that topic, can we have an update on what's happening with the subdivision? Is this not the same property, or am I confused?
For D&G, the subdivision?
Yeah. That went through,
Well, the subdivision is complete. We have 2 different parcels down there now. Yes.
so now we have a parcel with this building
Then we have our DPW facility on the other parcel.
and a DPW with the other thing. Okay.
And then the final thing on the agenda, we're running about 5 minutes late here, is the municipal center boiler replacement. Frank?
Well, this is a hard topic to follow because I'm looking for money.
Let me just jump on this real quick.
You get a mint, Frank.
About 5 years ago, Frank and I think budgeted about $100,000 for a boiler replacement for the county center. Back in 1982, as part of the renovation of the municipal center, there were 3 triad boilers that were put in place in the county center. The bases on those were replaced 11 years later, which is a significant cost and a significant amount of work. As of 2010, one of those triad boilers was condemned. It no longer works. There's no repair that we can do with it anymore. Back in 2007-2008, as part of the geothermal project, there was an Airco condensing boiler that was put in, so the triads basically act as a backup to the Airco, the brand new one that was put in. The Airco is on its last legs, and the triad boilers are on their last legs. The money that Frank had budgeted years ago, that money went away. He didn't have the opportunity or the time to get that in that budget year. We thought at that point that the possibility of including these into the Courthouse Project as part of Phase 3 and 4 and 5 that we're in right now would work. It's about $122,000 cost basically to replace the boilers, but as I brought to this committee before, the money that's left over for the Courthouse Project in Phases 3, 4, and 5, and since we're not doing the carport facility out front, we could use that money to replace these boilers. Frank has looked at this and said, and so is Johnny Miller, who does most of the HVAC work here at the county center. They'll most likely not last another winter.
Well, I'd just like to add to that, the Airco boiler is shot.
Shot completely.
That needs to be replaced or rebuilt at a cost that's equal to a new boiler.
Right.
So the cost you're looking for is approximately what?
About $125,000.
That Ms. Bramer?
Thanks. I would make a motion that we go forward with the replacement.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor, second by Mr. Loeb, correct? Discussion. Mr. Whitehead, I'm going to let the floor have discussion, then Mr. Wild.
Sorry, just no reserve for this? We didn't plan ahead?
Well, we had it in the budget, I think 4 or 5 years.
4 years ago, I think.
2015.
It was at the same time that we started our construction project on the courthouse, and we didn't get it done that year,
So the core team decided to put that 100,000, the 100,000 went back into the general fund. The core team decided to roll that into the building project as one of the phases, the following phases, because at the time we didn't know exactly the heat system that was going in the new building. It didn't happen, so.
Mr. Whitehead?
Yeah, and I think they just already said it, but that new boiler was part of the Siemens project. And you're still paying Siemens. I think this year might be the last year, I'm not sure on that. But, it's pretty sad when the equipment that we put in doesn't outlast the bond. In fact, I think that's illegal. And I don't know why you wouldn't be going back after Siemens to make good on that equipment.
Mr. Frank?
Well, unfortunately, the boiler wasn't part of the service contract of the, with the heat pumps and with the geothermal field. It was excluded from the contract.
That was another mistake, doing the contract, not having it part of the contract.
Not listed as equipment under warranty.
It's the contract that keeps on giving, the Siemens contract. Any other discussion? Ms. Kramer?
What about the heat pumps? Are they still functioning as
Yeah, and
they were before, not the way that we thought they were going to, but the way they have been?
The other part of this is the current boilers go into a plate and heat exchanger, so the boiler temperature hits one side of this exchanger, the heat pumps draw off the other side. The heat exchanger sprung a leak about 3 weeks ago. So with the new boilers that I'm talking about...
Did Siemens come take care of that?
No, that's not part of the contract. The new boilers don't require that plate and heat exchanger, so that's a $60,000 item that would have to be changed if we try to bring the current boilers up to. So the new boilers will inject heat directly into the heat pump loop, whereas now the boilers have to go through the plate and heat exchanger. It saves us one step. And these are also condensing high-efficiency boilers. Should save. So they should be more efficient.
If we go forward, which sounds like to me, we're going to have that motion in a minute, Mr. Thomas, would that be included in this year's budget, financing it, or would you recommend that we put it in next year's budget?
Also, it's how we already raised the $100,000 by tax. We already have the money, the way I look at it. How many times do we want to raise $100,000 to do the same project? It's not the taxpayers' fault that we didn't get the project done. So the way I look at it, $100,000 sits there in fund balance.
So that would be this year then, okay. Mr. Ajos?
I
And
just
then we're
want to
going to vote.
interject is, we had a $16.5 million courthouse project. Phase 1 and 2 of that project are over with. And while it wasn't significantly under budget, it was still under budget. But for phase 3, 4, and 5, we still have a fair amount of money. So we could use the money within that project to get this, because it encompasses part of that area. So we could use some money in that project to cover this cost. And again, since we didn't build the carport out front and that was removed from the project, there is money available in that project to do this.
One final comment, and then I'll have Frank give that Frank, but you go ahead, Frank.
I just want to say I need to expend this now. We need to get this in place before heating season.
Okay.
I'm sure there's
It's immediate need, an ASAP, okay. Frank, Thomas?
Well, that's fine, but I don't think we should take borrowed money to supplement tax money that's already been raised. And the borrowed money, any surplus can go back and pay the debt.
I don't think you should probably do that.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to go forward with the funding, and then obviously it will be transferred over to finance. I'm going to call the vote now. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passed. Okay, that concludes. I apologize for being 14 minutes and 44 seconds late. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Strauss, second by Mr. McDevitt. All in favor?
Aye.
Passed. Adjourned.
We always
John.
stop.
You're gonna be